religious education through the Orthodox Christian Network, a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George in Bethesda, Maryland, which is very appropriate because I usually don't say this at the beginning, but just a reminder that our faith is properly expressed locally and Eucharistically. So it's important that this religious education ministry is centered. The heartbeat of it is the parish. And so I'm Michael Haldis, and we're going to be continuing our discussion as we wind down this educational year, continuing our discussion based on the life of St. Mary of Egypt, who will be celebrating one of her saints' days, the final Sunday of Lent, next Sunday. And we began a discussion on Western Easter. We couldn't have class last week due to a variety of circumstances, but we're having class today, and we're going to have it again next week, and that'll be it until, God willing, September. But today, I'm calling this reflection the iconic life of St. Mary of Egypt, because we're just going to continue some exploration of her story and, of course, how it applies to us. And as always, just a reminder, have some people here seated around a table. You'll hear the discussion back and forth. Anybody watching online, feel free to write something in the comments section for us to address, but just listen in and comment as you see fit. So I'm going to start with a statement to get your reaction to, your agreement, disagreement, just reflection. But this is a statement from a book, Ethics of Beauty. You might remember, those of you who were here last year, I spent a lot of time on that book being the centerpiece of the theme of the year, Beauty, Goodness, and Truth by Dr. Timothy Batitis. And he writes this that I thought was germane to St. Mary's story, especially as it applies to us. He says, in the West, the intellectual sins like pride were taken as primary and as the first line of spiritual defense. In the East, the sensual sins were taken as primary. The battle should be fought and won there. So, in the West, intellectual sins are the first line of battle we have spiritually. In the East, he's saying that it's more of the sensual sin, the five senses, not sensual just as in sexual stuff, but sensual in general, right? As the first line of defense. So, thoughts, reactions to that?
Heart versus head.
Heart versus head. Okay. Good way to put it. And okay, so that's characterizing it. So are you saying that you agree with it?
Intellectualizing.
Yeah.
When he refers to the West, is he talking about the West pre-Reformation West? Because we might say our Catholic brothers and sisters still participate in a liturgical service, as do the Orthodox. But the Protestants, who stripped a lot of that away, they've removed all of the sensory aspects of worship, the way that we practice in the East.
Contextually, as I remember the book, I would say it's more modern West. And I would think, and I don't think Dr. Petit is listening to this, but if he did, he can correct me at some point. But a lot of, even within the liturgical West, a lot of the faith is much more focused on an intellectual defense, focused on pride, focused on the proper understanding leading to the proper experience, as opposed to the East orientation of experience leading to the understanding. So he did not, I do not recall that he distinguished between Protestant, Catholic. He was, and you can make a case too, frankly, we're Orthodox, so our orientation is East, but physically our church here is in the West. And some of the things, of course, we have to deal with is living in a Western culture. How does that affect our Eastern orientation? Maybe not at all, but I think it's certainly.
But we're certainly taught in the Orthodox liturgy that much of the liturgical rituals focus on the sensory experience, right? I mean, this is a celebration of the incarnation, right? What we do, so we exalt the body. We don't denigrate the body. We don't denigrate the physical, but they have to conform to what the church and what Christ expects of us. I don't know if it's an oversimplification. If you talk about the West and you don't distinguish between Catholicism and maybe there's high Catholicism, right? The magisterium, and there's everyday practitioners, right? So as opposed to Protestants, which you can say, I think more generally, that there is more of a focus on the intellectual aspect of it and less on the liturgical for self-evident reasons.
Well, it depends what Protestants do. I think Methodism was a reaction to extreme intellectualism and formalism. That's why, I mean, I don't even like these terms, East and West.
I know. Yeah.
I mean, myself, because I think it's just, I mean,
It's much more
it's
complicated.
basically
Yeah,
Aristotle
yeah.
versus Plato. I mean, which are both Western. And the Byzantines never considered themselves, quote, Eastern. To me, I would always prefer the term maybe sort of Catholic/Protestant versus Orthodox.
Even then, it gets a little murky because I agree. I agree with you.
mean, it just bothers me that we're always sort of classified as this kind of Eastern, like we're some group out of Bombay or something like that.
But-
Or whatever,
but
or
John,
whatever, kind
but-
of mystical Eastern. I
But
mean,
hang on, but
it's just not, but go ahead.
but it is a more Eastern form of worship. It is. And it's not because one is better than the other for our purposes, I would say, but the Greek encounter faces east. For most of that region's history, it's east. It's not west. So
Well, there was
That's
nothing in the
necessarily
West
true.
anyway.
Huh?
I mean, back in the
Right,
first
I
1,000
mean-
years, the West was.
The Western thought is based
See what you're
upon,
saying?
the Western analytical thought and empirical thought is based upon Aristotelian kind of thought. That's which is not Eastern.
But not in terms of orthodoxy. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I
You're
think-
right about
yeah, so-
Renaissance and the
Well,
like.
anyway, we're getting off the
Yeah.
subject.
No, it's fine. And I'm not.
But you could draw kind of
Yeah.
Plato, Neoplatonism, as
Sure.
sort of, and that's what you might classify as sort of Eastern, even though it's
Mhm.
not Eastern. And if our heritage is really Byzantine, the Byzantines never considered themselves quote, Eastern.
Right, they were
considered
Romans.
themselves Romans.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all
Romans
true.
with a Greek orientation.
Yeah. No, but I think you made some good points because one of the problems
And then pass it back.
one of the problems of our limitation of language, obviously, is one of the problems is sometimes for conversations we reduce things in a way that then borders on. It's worth having these discussions to keep us all grounded and accurate.
But John made a good point,
He
though,
did.
but the question itself is rather reductionist, right?
Sure.
There's this and there's this.
Right,
And
right,
it's
which I-
really
You
all
can't
of
write
these
it.
things.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but let's talk
Okay.
about this a little bit because it does contextualize.
Refocus us.
I've got to get myself refocused too. 'Cause I was enjoying the whatever you want to call it
Dialogue.
dialogue.
That was good. Mike was gonna get involved if you went to fisticuffs.
But probably not in the right manner. So obviously when as the church was evolving and growing, 4 of the major sees were in the Eastern geography and 1 was in the West, and you had some dichotomies, whatnot. But West and East isn't really, geographically, it's not really useful in terms of thinking it that way. I think the thing here is the intellectual approach versus more of the sensory or sensual. And then, of course, to be fair to all Christians out there, certainly, my experience. I'll speak from my experience. My experience in the evangelical Protestant church, where the sermon was the central part of their worship service. Surely there was a lot of appeal to an intellectual understanding of things to beget change in our salvific journey, right? So, other churches, my experience in the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church, less so, but it's somewhat dependent upon that particular parish. That's why for us as Orthodox, and I said my little caveat at the beginning, it's really important to always remember our faith is local and Eucharistic, right? That's why I wouldn't do something like this if it wasn't grounded first in the parish life. The other thing that's important, and it's arguable, is this is a good discussion because you can make a case. Hey, Andrea. Let's look at where sin began. Right? Where did sin begin? It's a rhetorical question. We know it began in the garden, right? And how did it begin? Did it begin because of the serpent, the fallen angel's intellectual appeal to Eve? Or did it begin in Eve's sensory reaction to what she was seeing?
Depends on how you describe and how you interpret that descriptions from.
It does. It actually does. And we're going to. There's so many directions I want to go, but interpretation is very important for a lot of reasons. Before I elaborate on that, unless someone else wants to, the other thing I think is useful for our discussion, and I think I was having this conversation with you, Mike, the other day. Discussing differences, comparing and contrasting is useful, to all help us understand and grow. It's not useful if in any way we start believing because we believe we may have more of a correct theology,
Ours is best.
ours is best, that somehow that means we are best. Because the irony of everything is, the irony of all of this is, yes, all of us are Orthodox Christians and committed Orthodox Christians, as evidenced is we're sitting around here when there's beautiful food and coffee out there and fellowship. We're here, we're committed, which means we're serious about our Orthodox faith, not just because for some of us, because of our Greek heritage, there's many things. And we believe, and obviously we accept and believe Orthodoxy because we do believe that tradition of Christianity is the one we believe it's correct, or we wouldn't be doing it. And that's no denigration of anybody else that believes their tradition is correct. However, the irony of all of this is God doesn't put himself in any box of rules he's given us, right? So we can't presuppose anything where somebody is salvifically and spiritually based on their tradition. Case in point, who did Christ use most of the time to illustrate, or a lot of times to illustrate who was properly doing what they were supposed to? Samaritans, right? Exactly. So if someone doesn't practice in a way we're used to, or is exposed to a lot less, or may even be incorrect, there's nothing that we know necessarily that God's not taking that kernel of what they have and their heart's right with him because of what they've been given and where he's directing them. So my point is, these differences are good to help us understand, but that's about where it ends, right? We can't presuppose any.
I would say that the understanding that we're all seeking is our relationship with Christ.
Mhm.
Our relationship.
Right.
Not judged by you and you and you and you, but that's the interpretation part. When you look at the Bible, and there are so many millions of people who look at the Bible, every word is absolutely accurate. None of it is accurate. It's all a historical literature that leads people to think about things, and others nice stories, no particular anything.
Well, that's because the scriptures outside of the Holy Spirit have no authority or truth. It's all through the Holy Spirit. That's why back when that whole, and there's a lot of reasons why, and historians like John would probably know better than I would, but this whole notion of scripture being self-interpreting and all this stuff, it just went too far afield in reaction to certain things that were going on. And we got this big mess we have today of 40,000 denominations, whatnot. But despite all of that, God's still at work accomplishing his purposes in our mess. And to your point, yeah, we're all in the mess together. So it's not useful to, create further division through differences. But these ways of seeing things intellectually, sensory, of discussing and interpreting is important, especially in St. Mary's story, because there's so much to learn from there. But and it's arguable about this whole sensory versus intellectual in the Garden of Eden, because you could argue that the first line of defense was he was appealing to her intellect, right? Her reasoning powers, right? God told you this, but I'm telling you this. What do you think? Right? But then you have the scripture that says, so when the woman saw the tree was good for food, was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree beautiful to contemplate, she took its fruit and ate. So where did she cross the line? When she was listening to the garbage that she was being fed, or in the sensory contemplation of the beauty she saw that was now maybe influenced by what she said? She no longer saw the beauty for what it was, but a beauty with a disordered desire. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? So it gets a little complicated.
And come a few thousand years later, it's not intellectual curiosity to be applauded. So,
It depends on where it takes you.
well, do we know where it takes us when we go, when we get started?
Well, we can make
Look at the debate that's on now, is when does the soul of embryos, frozen embryos, are really people? And look, we're starting off with a good purpose.
it's hard to know where the intellect takes us, because this is where,
Right.
well, and I'm not an expert on this, but I know, I'm one of those people where once I get the essence of something and it no longer makes me curious, I don't always remember the details or care about them. But where I'm going with this is, I've studied enough mythologies and literatures and whatnot. You see patterns of story, and then you see what's beautiful about our faith is you see that pattern happened for real. We believe for real. So where I'm going with that, we're talking about Genesis. Well, what's the first thing Cain did when the earth would no longer yield for him, because he's the ultimate sinner, right? He's the archetypal sinner. So what happened? What did he do? What do you go found?
With the
Cities with what? Technology. So now he's creating artificial means of power as opposed to communing with God. So is technology bad or good? Well, it depends, right? But most of the patterns of the stories and most of our human history, we see both, right? We see wonderful things we can use for healing through technology, through our innovation, through our artificing, if you will. I think one teacher says it like that. And then you see it all get weaponized at the same time. So, so intellectual curiosity, untethered from communion with God, isn't always
We don't know that it isn't good until
right.
Until it isn't, really.
No, we don't. But I'm just saying, it's proceed with caution.
Yes.
Is ultimately what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I mean, we're given our minds and our intellects for a reason. We're not robots or automatons. It's if our desires are disordered at a sensory level, how does that play out then in our intellectual curiosity? Would be a question, right? How does that? I don't have the answer for that. I could just look around and we see a mess we make of things as human beings. It's everything that's good we can unfortunately use for the wrong reasons.
Well, we only need to look at the world temperature and know that.
Yeah. Again, I introduced this because I was thinking about the battle of St. Mary of Egypt, what she really went through, right? And I would, we talked about the 17-year battle in the desert, in that liminal space that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. It was mainly, as we understand it wasn't so much the intellectual or mental gymnastics. It was putting to death the sensory, the disordered desires, the sensory things that had her in her grip. I mean, from what you know of the story, do you agree with that? Do you not agree with that? John had given me a wry smile. I don't know if you had a comment or just.
Not at all.
You can't see it, but he's giving me this devilish grin at the end of the room. Usually I can read what he's thinking. I have no clue now.
Oh yeah, with her, I think it always was a conversation.
And that's her addiction.
Yeah.
That's her addiction. And that's not always a stop and it's gone, right?
Mm-mm. No, right. And it required, what I want to transition to now, it required a lot of in that liminal space, in that no man's land she was in, that terrible place for at least 17 years. Patience. Yeah. Did we bring that up last time? I can't remember.
A little bit. We were talking about the kind of different levels of suffering and things like that. We got off on that.
Yeah. I was thinking about her struggle and her story in the context of our modern world.
Today she'd have a therapist.
Well, when it comes to the frenetic pace of our world and what's required really for growth and healing, I think there's, as you'll see in a minute when I bring this up, there's multiple things, multiple stories of the saints of Christ himself we can look to. But I think that it requires a dedication and understanding of incredible patience to really understand what it takes to grow in the Lord as we should. And I don't know that it's so easy to be patient with ourselves and with other people in the kind of, at least in the culture we're in right now, like culture here. I can't speak for the whole world, but we just heard we heard it today in the epistle. We heard Hebrews 13:5 about Abraham. After he patiently endured, he obtained the promise. Mm-hmm. And Mary's story is one of patient endurance. You remember how old Abraham was when he first received the calling from God? 75. You know how old he was when he when God, when he received when Isaac was born and Sarah got pregnant and his name was changed from Abraham exalted father to Abraham, father of many, 99. So he got this promise 24 years later. Anybody waiting 24 years for a promise of any sort still? That hasn't given up on it?
If you're married,
What promise are we waiting for?
you keep those promises.
Go ahead, Ellen.
You said, I'm sure, like you said, the self-acceptance and the patience.
Mhm.
I do feel like the pace that our society is at, especially right around here, where, basically two people have to be working, you got family, you got these kids' activities and everything. And I feel like even you want to / need to keep up this appearance of, if not perfection, at least acceptance. And so there's not really a whole lot of room to give yourself acceptance for these flaws or even maybe deep imperfections that might not even be our own fault. Like, okay, Mary was, today we would say she had been abused, she had been whatever, right?
Probably.
And we all might have these imperfections that might not be even, our fault, whatever, right? We have these imperfections that you can't really give yourself room to accept and sit with. And that's what you need to do to get over them. You need to give yourself time to just sit with the Lord or sit and say, help me with this. But there's not room for that here in this society. And you have to make room for that in your private life. But tell me, in your day, you have to really, it's like harder than getting up and running by far for a lot of people, but so maybe going out into the desert for 30 years seems easy, if you could.
I know. There is certainly a dynamic tension between, for lack of better terms, again, to use the, kind of a secular culture, if you will, versus really what we need to do as Christians to live the truth. Because Christ says, I can't remember if I brought this up a couple of weeks ago, Luke 21:19, by your patience possess your souls. Remember he said that? Do you know another an equally valid English translation of by your patience possess your souls? By your endurance, you will gain your life. Because anybody remember that from my real good Greek-speaking friends in this room? Remember the word that's often used for life or soul in the scripture? Psyche? Psyche. Yeah. Soul. Right. But it also gets translated life because our understanding, again, what is the soul? It's the life of the body. So we talk about body and soul separate, but it's not, right? This is why it's important. I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but remember in our understanding, our Orthodox understanding of what happened in the Garden of Eden was that the part of us that part of us that's tethered to God was cut off by their actions. So that's why, remember, he said you will die, but Adam lived. We can argue literally whatnot. Adam lived another 900 years. So what death did he experience? It was spiritual death, right? Spiritual death. And I like Father Stephen DeYoung's analogy the best. He said, think of it like if you tie a real tight string around your finger, eventually you cut off the circulation. At some point, the finger will rot and drop off. So the condition that we're in, first and foremost, is spiritual death. And because of that, there's physical and biological death. And the tangent that I wanted to go off on a little bit, Mike and I were talking about this too, because is it okay if I bring up your friend? So Mike has a friend who is struggling, that wants to have faith, but can't get there. And I guess he saw some atrocities in wartime conditions. So he saw some real evil things. And I think any of us that's even come close to dealing with anything that's like any type of premature death or evil can sympathize and relate how hard it is then to have faith if you've never been grounded in it. But this is where I think our Orthodox understanding is really important, because if if we really, even if we say it, if we really down deep in our hearts believe that biological death is the greatest evil there is, then it's really going to be hard to grieve with hope or to have that faith, right? Now, I say that with great sympathy for him or anybody else, because we've all of us in this room, I know, have gone through stuff. And even then, even with this understanding we think we have, it's really difficult, don't you think? It's really difficult sometimes in encountering of suffering and death to really hang on to that hope, right?
Look at the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Right. But
Yeah,
foundationally, a lot of Christian, hey, Boris, a lot, not really emphasizing that and understanding that, look, first and foremost, our faith is all about spiritual fall and spiritual warfare. That it's easy to just not have that mindset and that heart set that enables us to, when we go through these things, to still hang on to, like Paul said, it's not that we don't grieve, we grieve with hope. So I'm saying a lot of this, and this, God willing, when the new priest comes in, if I'm still teaching next year, this is the direction I may go in, some of this Old Testament stuff to really, go deeper. But anyway, that's what I was thinking about as I was putting this together, this whole notion. I think, John, you had a question?
I
Or
was
comment?
just wanting to
Yeah.
go off on a tangent again.
That's okay.
Just
Tangent's
wondering
okay.
If the verse that you cited from Luke in terms of patience,
Mhm.
I'm just wondering in sort of historical context again of who he's writing to,
Mhm.
which is sort of late first century, sort of, I can't even use the term Christians there, who expected the second coming to sort of come immediately and things like that. Of him maybe making a sort of reference to why it hasn't come and to be sort of patient in that regard.
Let me read
Does that
the.
make any sense at all?
Yeah, let me read the
And
context.
plus, when he's writing to, the temple has been destroyed. At least most historians think that. I mean, it's just sort of, the world's kind of coming apart. Second coming, most of them believe that second coming was imminent, and just sort of saying, why are we having suffering, sort of patience. And even struck by the last, and then I'll stop.
Yeah, okay.
I'm even struck by we were talking about the suffering last week. I mean, the Gospels, I'll use the term disagree. I don't mean to sort of say that. I mean, look at Mark and I think Matthew both say Jesus' last words on the cross are, why have you forsaken me? Luke changes that a bit, and it's not at all in John, so they don't sort of, even agree with that. So anyway.
Well, right, but then the analogy I've always heard I thought was really useful. If you pick up 4 different biographies on
Right.
Abraham Lincoln,
Right.
they're all going to be coming at it from
Right.
different. Yeah, right. So so the disagreements don't really amount to anything. So, but you said something about the temple. Well, remember too, the temple falling and being destroyed wasn't a huge deal to a lot of them. They didn't, because you know that because because the temple was built by Herod, and a lot of them thought it was a sham anyway, and they were doing land grabs and stuff. And so the destruction of the temple doesn't even show up in a lot of the writings of the Holy Fathers right around there, because it wasn't that consequential. So let me read you what Christ said before that, Luke 19. Let me read you from 10 on, and it'll contextualize it a little bit, because he's talking about the end. He's saying, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there'll be great earthquakes in various places, and famine and pestilences, and there'll be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, but it will turn out for you an occasion for testimony. Therefore, settle it in your hearts to meditate beforehand what you will answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers, relatives, friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience possess your souls. Imagine hearing all that. And by the way, you're not a hair on your head will be lost. I'm about to get my head chopped off, right? He's talking about something deeper there. But here's the thing. The analogy I'm drawing is that, okay, so this is more of an external conditions. He's saying that all these things externally are going to be raging around you, but by your patient endurance, you will possess your soul, gain your life. He who loses his life will find it. So we may not, right now, maybe some of us are, we may not have all these chaotic things going on around us, but
Mhm.
for some of us probably do. But there's still this chaos here, right? There's still a lot of chaos internal. There's doubts, there's sins, there's stuff there's stuff we struggle with. We might have a recurring sin in our life we just really struggle with. And I like what this one father confessor said when his person he was guiding called him and said, "Father, I've fallen again." He texted him. I read this. He was like, "Father, I've fallen again." His father, spiritual father, wrote back, "Get up." Right. Right. So again, we're, some of us right now may be going through that stuff where we're falling, we're getting back up, we're falling. It doesn't feel like victory, but it is because we're striving. So what I'm saying is and that takes patient work, right? And we may get frustrated with ourselves because of our egos, our disordered desires. I should be making more progress. I should be better than this. Everybody on social media is better than this. I can see it. Look at all their stories. Why am I so bad? So there in Mary of Egypt remember we talked, maybe we didn't last week, the symmetry of what she went through. 17 years of a debauched lifestyle, 17 years of struggle before we don't get the next 30 years, which were her aesthetic growth, right? We get the 17. So there's a lot to be said for the patience that Christ is saying amidst external and internal circumstances for our Boris, you're being summoned. Yeah. So anyway, John, I don't know if that's helpful or it sounds like wishful thinking but certainly debate me push back on me.
No, I was just thinking about all the context of what you were saying last week about suffering. And it's just how difficult it is to sort of reconcile all that.
Oh, yeah.
Pointing out these things in the gospel about, they even had a hard time, and you have the Son of God even maybe not questioning the plan, but even he's saying, why does this have to occur? It's just that was just sort of the point I was making, and then also, if I can express it correctly, what also struck me about the Mary of Egypt story is she's spiritually saved, but sort of maybe a lesson for all of us. I mean, they didn't exactly make her sort of queen of the Rose Bowl parade,
right?
Or something like that. She's out in the desert. She's it's this maybe this notion of spiritually, it doesn't necessarily equate to kind of material or betterment in life. I mean, it's just how difficult that sort of process is.
Yeah, Ellen, I know you want to say something, but that's the whole point. The whole point is that's what we struggle with, right? Because what does Christ say? The things of the world are abomination to God, and we hear that and we think we get it, but when you really start processing it, you realize, oh my gosh, I am not living the life I should be living. And then on the flip side, it becomes thank God for God's grace, right? Because the little kernels of thing I am doing right versus all the things I'm doing wrong, he still loves me and accepts me as long as I stay. This is gonna come out wrong. He loves us no matter what, but we experience his love the way we should by staying a branch to his vine through the sacramental and aesthetic life. That's the thing. Yeah. And I didn't mean to make it like it's conditional, right? And Ellen, you had something to say. I'm sorry. I waited patiently.
Yeah, so like when you had said about the thing about calling for the priesthood, Father, I've fallen, and he says, get up. And it is consistent with the whole Mary of Egypt thing. It's like, I do think that there has to be a thread of self-compassion in this to even be able to accept the instruction of get up and be able to say, I'm worth getting up. And also, so for me to even stay connected to all of this, I think there has to, and that's not communicated as much either right now, in today's world, about giving yourself space for healing even. It's like, oh, well, why am I? It's just this constant pushing away of imperfection, I think, in today's society. Instead of saying yeah, I'm doing the best I can, or yeah, I'm working on it, and this is part of who I am. I'm not all perfect, or I'm pretty, So I think that's I think it's a problem, that is a problem with, I think it's a problem with our understanding of being a good Christian in some churches, and maybe
Well,
Like, even if there was a way, maybe it'd be like it's something good about confession, or some of these things. I don't know if we'd even feel comfortable bringing to confession, but I don't know. But the thing about Mary in Egypt, I almost think that, like, yeah, seeing her maybe at peace, but physically battered and whatever, helps us understand that, okay, we could be doing okay and at peace, but maybe we're not. You know, maybe we don't have the best curb appeal. Maybe we don't have the best whatever, but that's what's going to bring us closer to God. And, you know, I don't know, maybe that's.
there's a couple of things you said I think are really important. You know, if you look at everything Christ, like even in today's gospel, you know, Christ always had the perfect balance between that firmness of accountability and that compassion of forgiveness, right? We messed that up, you know. But he, you know, so there's always that accountability. You know, go and sin no more. I bring that up all the time. You know, so profound. It's so simply said.
Yeah, you don't even get off the parking lot
Yeah.
without sitting some more.
Right. And so, you know, we talk about perfection, right? We, I think, too much hear that word in a very humanistic way, perfectionism, versus the understanding when that word's used in the scriptures, it's more of a completeness, a holistic completeness, right? So there's going to be inherent flaws as we grow in that completeness and perfection. And here we talk about, there's another thing to look at suffering in this context, because there's nothing fun about suffering. But talk about getting to a place where you can have a reaction to something in your life, one of patience, because then you can take a deep breath, and before you react, start contemplating, what is this suffering? What's God doing with this? Because nothing happens apart from his will, right? He's not the cause of it necessarily. He doesn't cause the evil, doesn't cause it, but what within the suffering, and we know that that's legitimate because Christ did not abolish suffering yet. He transformed it. So all suffering can be transformative. Now, that can be really, you know, when it's minor suffering, it's easy to believe this. When it's major suffering, it's not so easy. Your friend saw that. It's not so easy for him. He sees these atrocities of war, but it doesn't negate the truth of the fact that God is everywhere present and fills all things, and he's present in our suffering. Mm-hmm. And the suffering can help us grow. It just takes sometimes a lot of patience to endure it. And then retrospectively, we see the pattern and we understand what it did for us, or what we took from it.
You mentioned the word perfection. You said it best many times over. Perfection is the evil to good.
Oh yeah, perfection is the enemy of good. You hear that in business all the time. When you have to get to a good enough solution to move on, perfection becomes the enemy of good. Good enough. Yeah. But I think it's applicable here, because I think sometimes we can, our egos can get wrapped up in perfectionism, and it kind of gets in the way of the humility. It's better to sometimes, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. What more do we need, right? It's often in our weaknesses that we perceive the closeness of God more so than in our strengths, because we give I think Father George Kateri is the one who said it. Like, if you really look at Samson was evil, so that's not a good example. But you look at the Samson in the Old Testament. Where did you get your strength, Samson? Well, how do we portray Samson in the movies? It's clear he got his strength. He's gorgeous George Adonis, but they're looking at him like, where'd you get all your strength? It wasn't apparent. It's often that God chooses the weak of the world, and Moses the stutterer, right, to be the spokesperson. There's one description of Paul: he was short, bald, and unimpressive. Makes me feel better, but he was the Lord. He was the spokesperson. The greatest evangelist of the. So, God, it's not always readily apparent, and sometimes our that's why these sufferings humble us. St. Mary suffered greatly, and she was still suffering. Right? You listened to the podcast. I don't know if I brought this up a couple of weeks ago. When she was talking to Zosima, she was still struggling. She was not, she walked across the water, was practically glowing. She did not see herself as anything more than someone still struggling. He was transformed by that. So
then she was where she should have been, and was effective to those who saw her, and actually to herself. To your point, take a deep breath.
Yeah, I think that's why there's patience. I'm more patient than I was, but this means something to me to facilitate this type of discussion, because I was tremendously impatient growing up. Got in my way more times than I could stand. My grandmother used to put me in the corner and make me count to 20 slowly. And when I tried to, to teach me patience, then when I tried to speed up the count, she'd make me start over. I get like just thinking about it. But patience is a hard lesson for all of us. And and to your point, Ellen, it's definitely harder now, because
Who's got time for that?
who's got time for patience, right? Good. Well, and I think I said this on the podcast. I don't remember, but I think I did. And Mary, there's so many things now to kind of soothe our suffering quickly without being willing to go through it, right?
Right.
You can.
Well,
Oh yeah, I did say
dopamine
this because I mentioned I'm not a mental health professional, but it's really quick to get a pill. It's really quick to maybe access things you shouldn't be accessing to alleviate the pain. I mean, it's just really quick to kind of get rid of that feeling.
And
And-
it's always a trip to the liquor store.
Right, exactly. I say I'm not a counselor because I got to be careful, because I'm not poo-pooing medications or whatnot. I'm just saying There- there's so many ways to soothe the pain, and it gets in the way sometimes of the patient endurance we need to go through.
I'm listening to Ellen and the conversation, everything's a deadline, right? You got to pick your kids up from here. You got to go there. I mean, you're in this really fast pace. I was just thinking of, somewhere I'd heard or seen something. They were talking about going somewhere like either in India or Bangladesh, somewhere that neck of the woods. And they were taking a ferry to one of the islands. And the ferry said it's going to leave at noon. And noon comes, 12:30 comes, 1 o'clock comes. When are we going to leave? And they said, well, it's not full yet. Well, when it's full, we'll leave. But you understand the difference was not noon. We've got to leave. And their thing was, well, that really doesn't make sense. We're all hanging out. It's okay. It's not bad weather that we got to get out in time. When we get some more people, we'll go. A totally different thought. Can you imagine doing that in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
No.
Well, come on, everybody, fess
No
up.
way, you're
How many
gone.
people are waiting for a communion today? Like, man, this line's taking forever,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
So what did I came last, and he said, who are you? You think you're a,
Oh, you're not in the choir and you're not in Sunday school.
where do you think you are?
Well,
Lutheran church.
actually, the worst with that is on Holy Saturday morning, you get people, and they're all in a hurry to get communion. Even before I was being an usher, and I would just say, he's not going to run out. Never run out in all the years I'm here. Just enjoy yourself. What are you in a hurry for?
And my point is, it rears its head every place, right? We're just an impatient people.
Yeah.
And
But that's the society inadvertently promotes us to be like that, right? And when we
But then it's your choice.
That's
Then it's
why-
our choice.
you got to be cognizant of it, and then you try and do what you can.
Yeah, but as long as we push away, as long as we're batting away our sin and imperfection, I don't think there's a way to heal it. Like that's
well, maybe, but that's not. Yeah, and so it is.
what's that?
Banning it away is just a form of healing.
And
It really is.
it's healing it.
It's not
I
just
don't.
banning it
Well,
away.
I think let's go ahead, Andrea.
So I really identify with what Ellen has been saying, because I think our spiritually versus what's going on socially is very different. And we're in direct conflict with each other, because I see that this, especially with my kids and going through things, it's instead of dealing with an issue, we normalize an issue, right? We normalize it. I don't think we take mental health seriously in this country at all. So we normalize it. But the problem is that even when society normalizes stuff, you still have this and this. So society can tell you everything's normal, but the person still has to deal with this and this. And that, when you're told something's normal, doesn't always gel. And I think when we compare that to like the saints, yes, they became saints, but before they became saints, they all had their struggles, right? They weren't necessarily good people.
Oh, and they still struggle.
Right?
They struggle to the end of their days.
But what we came to be saint was they all had to become accountable for what they had done in the end. And that is something I think that we're told it's normal, right? We're normalizing things instead of being accountable. So it's in direct conflict with our spiritual growth of accountability.
Yeah, because-
to become better Christians and be on that path with Christ. So it's this constant society norm versus the spiritual journey. And we have to figure out how to guide ourselves as well as our children into that right direction to take ownership of their issues, because none of us are perfect.
Right.
But like I say to my kids, we're all going to screw up, we're all going to mess up, but it's how we fix those and take ownership of those to move forward. And
Absolutely.
it's not right, and it's not normal.
Yeah.
Well, that's because
I do see
a lot of you have some circles where the reaction to this is to beat everybody over the head with their sin, right? Beat them to the point where they don't want to hear it anymore. And then some circles, there's really no such thing as sin. It's like you can't even talk about sin. That's why I love our Orthodox understanding of sin as a disease, as a virus, because it gets treated, right? It's more palatable because I think it's true, but it's an easier way to digest it because you realize, we got a sickness. That's where what Mike was saying, like this happened to the great St. Paul, right? Remember, Christ didn't take the thorn out of his side, wherever that was, because my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Paul needed a continual, as by his admission, not Michael Howard saying, he needed a continual humbling to be effective. So he let that be. And that requires sometimes patience of understanding, because there's certain things in our lives we may never overcome completely, but we understand it's something that God allows because it keeps us closer to him. And that's why stories like St. Mary of Egypt are very useful, because they're so extreme, but true. I mean, some people suffer this, which she suffered. Most of us, I would like to think, don't, but it's maybe some level of this, but it's through these extreme stories. And again, getting back to look at the character of the church, Christ's character. We put this story right before Holy Week, right? The healing of one of the worst types of sinners right before Holy Week, which should give us all great hope for whatever we're going through. I'll read you one last quote that I thought I came across this morning, actually, before we close down, just to remind us. I don't know, has anybody been struggling at all during Lent, doing everything we're supposed to be doing during Lent?
Everybody who has them.
Right, that's my point. So this is what Father Philip Lemasters. He's an Orthodox priest in Abilene, Texas. I like his writings. I've corresponded with him a little bit here and there. But he said, if we've embraced the spiritual practices of Lent with any level of integrity for the last few weeks, the weakness of our faith has become apparent to us. Our minds wander when we pray, and so much else seems more important than being fully present before the Lord, both in the services of the church and our daily prayers at home. We often make excuses not to fast to the best of our ability, and regardless of what we eat, drink, routinely indulge ourselves with self-centered desires for pleasure. We justify being stingy in sharing our resources and attention with neighbors, especially when we fear that doing so will compromise our illusions of self-sufficiency and comfort. By this point in Lent, we've all gained the insight of how much we fail to entrust ourselves fully to Christ for healing, to the point we can say with the broken-hearted Father in today's gospel, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I thought that was so apropos. Mm-hmm. And that's the tension we live in. I know we're going to wrap up. So that's the tension we live in. And I think, again, we have to be patient with ourselves and endure it and continue to struggle and not, to your point, Andrea, and it takes more and more immersion in the sacramental of life to build up the natural resistance to everything else going on out there. So thank God we have the Orthodox Church for that. Go ahead, John.
So as it pertains to practices during Holy Lent, perfection is the enemy of the good.
It is, exactly. Wait in.
Yeah.
So here we go.
All right, so we're going to close down there. Thank you all for those of you that joined. And I hope it was edifying for you listening to our spirited discussion around the table. So again, like I said, next week we're going to have class, God willing. It'll be our last class for the education year, because then we move into Palm Sunday and Holy Week and Pascha, and then the summer months afterwards. Everybody just gradually drifts away. And God willing, after that, we'll begin again in September. So God bless everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we'll look forward to being back